Within each of us lies the power to turn minor problems into big ones to take life's inevitable inconveniences and magnify them into self-created dramas that overwhelm us with unnecessary suffering, or we can choose the path of the sage who recognizes that nothing needs to disturb our inner stability unless we willfully turn it into something bigger than it inherently is. This mindset of non-disturbance, of meeting each moment with calm acceptance, instead of emotional upheaval, unlocks profound reserves of peace and wisdom. It is a skill to be cultivated through dedicated practice until our former habit of making metaphorical mountains from every molehill fades and we rediscover the simple grace of navigating life's ups and downs with centered poise. Question your inability to. Chapter 1. Question your inability to endure. Endure. Ask, why is this so unbearable? Why can't I endure it? You'll be embarrassed to answer. Marcus Aurelius. We often tell ourselves that a particular hardship is too much to bear, that it is unbearable, but Marcus challenges us to examine this notion. Why exactly is it painful? Let's pause to ponder this question. Truly, in that case, we will likely be embarrassed by the lack of a legitimate answer. The truth is that most of what we face is endurable if we have the proper perspective. Our minds frequently magnify challenges and make them seem immense and unconquerable. However, we may realize these difficulties are well within our capacities when viewed objectively. Consider physical pain and ailments. A throbbing headache or a sore back can indeed be incredibly unpleasant, but are they genuinely unbearable? Have we not endured similar pains countless times before we realize our ability to tolerate them, when we relabel them as mere discomforts instead of crises? Or what about stressful situations like public speaking or challenging conversations? The anxiety beforehand can make them feel overwhelmed, yet countless people endure such scenarios every single day without falling apart. We have an inner reserve of coping skills that can be tapped if we shed the false notion that we cannot bear it. Even emotional hardships like the loss of a loved one or the ending of an important relationship can seem unbearable. In the thick of the grief and heartache, and indeed profound sadness, is one of life's cruelest challenges, but in time, as millions can attest, this pain can be borne if we remain resilient. Do not be so quick to label something as unbearable. Interrogate that judgment rigorously. You may find that the only thing making it unbearable is your perception and attitude. Shine a light on that erroneous viewpoint by demanding a justification for why you endure. The lack of a convincing rationale will be evident. Genuine in hardship undoubtedly exists. Terminal illness, abuse, war and famine represent some of the most horrific circumstances a person can endure. We must retain compassion for those suffering unimaginable trauma and pain. Even in those nightmarish scenarios, many have summoned heroic resilience. For the rest of us facing more mundane struggles, we must stop pretending we cannot bear them. We often throw that label onto circumstances that, while challenging, can be persevered with the proper mindset. Question your protestations of unbearability. Possess more grit than you may realize. The embarrassment of having no defensible reason will nudge you toward enduring with resilience. Adopt a posture of quiet strength when facing difficulty. Breathe deeply and remain calm and centered. Resist the urge to become overwhelmed. Hold your challenges in a clear perspective instead of magnifying them. Take it moment by moment. If needed, call upon your problem-solving abilities to craft a plan for moving forward, and accept that some measure of stress or discomfort may accompany the process. So much of our suffering stems from resisting what is, from arguing with reality instead of accepting it with equanimity. That resistance is what makes things seem unbearable. Yet consistently asking, why can't I endure this, can cut through that resistance and realign us with our innate capacity for resilience. We strengthen what we practice daily. Just as exercising a muscle makes it more robust, maintaining an endurance mindset makes it more accessible. In our of struggle over time, we are prompting ourselves to honestly answer why something is unbearable. Forges that psychological muscle memory of perseverance. There will always be new challenges that test us yet we need not. Convince ourselves they are flatly unendurable before we have given ourselves a chance to withstand them with disciplined questioning and a steadfast refusal to exaggerate our hardship, we can flow through even the most daunting circumstances. The next time you begin to call something unbearable, pause and ask yourself to justify that label. If no defense emerges, realize you have the strength to carry on. Focus on the how, not the what. People are not. Chapter 2. Focus on the how, not the what. Disturbed by things, but by the views they take of them. Epic. Titus. Our suffering often arises is not from the event or situation, but from the perspective we adopt. The difficulty we face is not inherently disturbing. Our view of it troubles us. When adversity strikes, we frequently let our thoughts run rampant with catastrophizing and negative storytelling about the circumstance. We view it through a distorted lens of anxiety, anger, and fear. However, the objective facts of the situation are just that, facts. It is our interpretation that creates uneasiness within us. Imagine being stuck in a terrible traffic jam. For one person, this may generate panic about being late and missing an important event. The visions of total disaster they see in their heads play out in their minds, getting fired from their job, ruining everything. For another person in the same traffic, it is a chance to listen to an audiobook or podcast and practice patience. The situation is the same, but the views taken make all the difference. In the experienced disturbance, this plays out in countless areas of life. Spilling a drink at a restaurant is just a minor accident, but we may get furious about it making a big scene and disturbing our inner peace, or we can laugh it off and ask for some napkins, refusing to let it ruin our meal. Neither view changes the facts. We spill a drink, however, one perspective leads to upset, while the other allows us to move on undisturbed. The thing itself did not disturb us, only our volatile thoughts. A job termination or promotion denial is certainly disappointing and frustrating, but is it genuinely catastrophic? With one view, it becomes the world's end. Agonizing over the lost 4 months and filling ourselves with bitterness. From another perspective, it is a professional setback, to be sure, but also an opportunity to reassess, refocus, and pursue an even better path. Neither viewpoint alters the facts. One keeps us inwardly untroubled, while the other traps us in suffering. We cannot always control what happens to us, but we can regulate how we see it. Things are never as bad as our frantic minds may make them out to be in the heat of the moment. Pause, breathe, and adopt a more rational perspective. The thing itself doesn't have to disturb you, only the view you take of it can consciously choose a wiser outlook by maintaining objectivity about the bare facts and circumstances. We remove the basis for inner disturbance. Our thoughts are the trustworthy source of suffering, not externals. Worrying does not prepare us for anything, it merely depletes our peace of mind. In vain, anger cannot change the past, it only robs us of joy in the present. Applying prudent reason to our perspectives shields us from being tossed about by these draining mental states. Do not be enslaved by a negative mindset. Shift your view, and the thing itself need not be a source of torment. No matter how bad a situation may seem, we always have the power to view it through a lens of wisdom, courage, and self-restraint instead of fear. This is not to deny brutal realities, but to protect our core happiness from being held hostage to circumstances beyond our control. A severe illness is undoubtedly highly challenging. However one perspective treats it as a death sentence and a reason to become despondent, another wise outlook sees it as an obstacle to overcome with fortitude, or an impetus to appreciate each day more vibrantly. The situation remains the same. Our view alone separates suffering from equanimity. The next time something distressing occurs, do not just lament it. Pause to reflect on the perspective you are taking toward it. Is it a viewpoint that will disturb your peace needlessly, or is it a mindset that will help you endure with grace and equilibrium? Or always have this choice over your inner orientation. One disturbs, the other doesn't, despite the facts being equal. Stand guard over your views, and do not let wayward thoughts create suffering. While we cannot control any externals impacting us, we need never surrender sovereignty over the views we choose to adopt about our circumstances. Here is where our freedom truly lies, in the wise perspective that allows us to flow through life with balance instead of continually being overwhelmed by events. The next time your thoughts dramatize something, shift your viewpoint to objectivity. The thing only gains distressing power if you bestow it through your interpretations. Views obstacles as. Chapter 3. View obstacles as opportunities. Opportunities. You must build up your life action by action and be content if each one achieves its goal as far as possible, and no one can keep you from this, but there will be some external obstacle perhaps, but no obstacle to acting with justice, self-control and wisdom. But what if some other area of my action is thwarted? Well, gladly accept the obstacle for what it is and shift your attention to what is given, and another action will immediately take its place, one that better fits the life you are building. Marcus Aurelius. Life is constructed action by action, choice by choice. Our aim should be to act with virtues like justice, temperance and practical wisdom in each situation as best we can. No external force can stop you from embodying these qualities, no matter the obstacles encountered. Inevitably, roadblocks will thwart your desired course of action. In other areas of life, a job gets lost, a deal falls through, and a plan is derailed. These are mere externals, temporary circumstances outside your control. How you respond to such obstacles is what truly matters, and what is entirely within your power. Rather than despairing, you must gladly accept and embrace the obstacle. Do not fight or rail against it, as that wastes energy and causes needless suffering. Calmly take stock of the new situation you face and the opportunities it presents. Then redirect your efforts toward a new action that aligns with the life you are building through your chosen virtues. There is no need to agonize over detours. An obstacle obstructing one path does not negate your ability to act rightly through another path. Adapt and flow like water around the obstruction by handling it with grace and wisdom instead of struggling against it. You alchemize the obstacle into a catalyst for the following right action on your revised journey. With this malleable mindset, you lighten the burden. You need not be bothered by external circumstances you cannot control. You always maintain the power to reorient yourself toward ethical choices that move your life journey forward, one action at a time. Embrace each obstacle as simply redirection toward your next growth opportunity. Consider an entrepreneur whose new business venture fails to take off. Hoped she could lament her lousy luck and despair over the closed path, or she could accept the setback, maintain her composure, and look for the new path. Revealed the skills she developed may have led to a different entrepreneurial idea. Perhaps an investor she met along the way opens another door. The initial plan was thwarted, but she identified her following the right action by steadily readjusting. Meanwhile, she cultivated persistence and resilience to virtues that shaped her character. Or take a case where someone gets unexpectedly laid off from their job. A knee-jerk reaction of anger and feeling victimized is understandable, but those responses are wasted seeds that breed only more resentment. A wiser course is to take stock of the new circumstances, rationally use the transition as an opportunity to re-evaluate priorities. Is a career change to better align with one's core values and aims? Could this lead to starting a new business or going back to school? Yes, adversity struck for reasons beyond their control. However, within their control is the power to embrace it as an obstacle that presents unforeseen openings when met with a malleable opportunity mindset. This principle of using obstacles as inflection points extends to all areas of life. In our relationships, we cannot control if a close friend or partner decides to part ways, but we can control how gracefully we accept their decision and what we do next. Do we cling angrily to what was, or adapt by stewarding the relationship to a different mature form while opening ourselves to new connections? The former breeds resentment and the latter cultivates understanding. With our health, we cannot control being struck by an illness or injury, but we can control whether we view it as a reason to become despondent or as a prod to tap into our resilience and explore new therapeutic remedies. The impediment itself did not defeat us, only our insistence on raging against it instead of evolving with it would do so even in our creative pursuits and intellectual growth. Obstacles are pivot points for new pathways to emerge. A writer struggling with a specific book concept could bash themselves over it endlessly or shift to a fresh idea that flows more naturally. A student styed by one academic subject could embrace it as an opportunity to discover for a different calling for which they are more naturally suited. The obstacle makes our path non-linear, but we must continue the overarching progress. It is essential to acknowledge that obstacles can be painful and challenging. Humans experience emotional weight when facing significant life disruptions, and it's necessary to process these emotions. Wise people do not suppress their human experience or excessively dwell on negative feelings that do not lead to positive outcomes. Instead, they allow themselves to feel their emotions and move forward when possible, adjusting their intentions and actions to adapt to the new circumstances. There will always be setbacks, delays, unforeseen twists and derailments on our life paths. These are inevitabilities we cannot escape. We can control whether we view them as catastrophes that stop us in our tracks, or as rerouting obstacles that alter the journey's trajectory, not its essential destination of leading a life of virtue and wisdom with a malleable mindset. We do not cling so tightly to any path or plan immune to the fickleness of outside events. We remain flexibly committed to living by our core principles, allowing our plans to adapt while our virtuous aims remain steadfast. When embraced with this open outlook, even the most imposing obstacle redirects toward our next growth possibility instead of a stopping point. When your intentions are righteous and your heart is steadily anchored in wisdom, the obstacle becomes the path. You need only maintain your ethical composure, accept the new terrain, and identify the following virtuous action amid the altered landscape. With each graceful shift like this, you continually reinforce the philosophy and character that composed every prior step, strengthening your core while flowing like water around any obstructions. Imagine a journey being navigated along a winding path through the mountains. One could follow the path unquestioningly, assuming nothing will ever block their way. The first fallen tree or rock slide obstructing the path could feel devastating, like an impassable barrier. But what if we viewed the path itself differently from the outset? What if we saw it as a foggy trail that would undoubtedly encounter obstacles that require regular course adjustments? Then each obstruction becomes an expected rerouting instead of a catastrophic event. We pack our bags, anticipating needing to scale rocks, forge new paths, double back and find creative detours. The obstacles are embraced as part of the inherent journey instead of deviations from an improbable obstacle-free path. This is the stance we must take toward our own life's journey. We only need some answers or a perfectly mapped route charted from start to finish. We aim to act following our foundational virtue and wisdom, with each step adjusting fluidly as obstacles reveal themselves. Neither attached to nor deterred by any single circumstance, our stability is rooted in the integrity of our ethical way of living and being, not the externals that bend our specific path from one moment to the next. In this light, obstacles are not burdens to lament, but inevitable features to leverage as walking sticks that help blaze new trails. By embracing them as redirection opportunities, we continually reaffirm our intention to keep moving forward with one mindful action after the next. While the itinerary may change, our virtuous heading remains true. Our core purpose is to walk the trail with wisdom and grace, a purpose that no obstacle, however imposing, can ultimately obstruct if we commit to continual realignment instead of futile resistance. Don't suffer imaginary. Chapter 4. Don't suffer imaginary pains. We are more often frightened than hurt, and we suffer more in imagination than in reality. Seneca. How often do we spend more time anxiously playing out doomsday scenarios in our minds than actually enduring the Reality, we fear our thoughts, can take us on a journey through hypothetical hells, torturing us with visions of worst-case futures that may never come to pass. The truth is that we tend to be frightened more frequently than we are genuinely harmed or hurt. The threats and pains that seem so large and looming in the imagination really fully materialize in their dreaded form, and yet we spend extraordinary amounts of energy suffering over these imagined realities. Before they even occur, this tendency is an excellent source of unnecessary suffering. We borrow misery from tomorrow, feeling panic and distress in the present over mere possibilities and vague forebodings. Our mental movies of catastrophic futures exhaust us far more than the situations we actually face. Be wakeful to this pattern of suffering more in imagination than reality. When you find your mind catastrophizing, playing the what-if game down darkened mental alleys, pause, separate what has happened from what you've merely conceived. The reality in front is usually far less monstrous than your constructed fearscape. There will always be genuine pains to experience in life. Why exponentially increase your suffering by indulging imaginary ones? Problems are resolved far more quickly when met with a calm mind than one addled by terrifying fantasy. Face circumstances as they are, not as your frightened imagination has depicted them. Most monsters remain confined to the mind's dark corners. Take the example of public speaking, one of the most common anxiety-inducing experiences people dread. In the lead-up, we torture ourselves imagining every possible humiliation, freezing up, completely uncontrollable, shaking for getting every word, making a fool of ourselves in front of everyone. Yet when the event happens, was it ever as traumatic as we envisioned? Did we not overcome it, flaws and all, and move on unscathed? The reality rarely measures up to the self-induced terror show we put ourselves through ahead of time, and all that needless suffering was for naught. Or consider everyday personal worries about health scares, financial stresses, interpersonal conflicts, or countless other sources of anxiety. We get trapped in rabbit holes of catastrophizing about worst-case scenarios like job losses, tragic diagnoses, permanent rifts, and more. But what happens in reality? Sometimes significant difficulties occur, to be sure, more often, though the world continues turning, and the situations lack the earth-shattering dimensions. Our fixation on them led us to believe our feverish anticipation painted things in doomsday hues, only for reality to expose our inner turbulence as an overreaction. This is not to diminish the real crises that can erupt in life: the passing of a loved one, enduring a severe illness, getting divorced, going bankrupt. These represent genuine agonies few of us can avoid encountering at some point on the human journey. However, even in such profound trials, we would be wise to resist projecting extraneous imagined pains atop the already heavy reality. When grieving a death, we need not exacerbate our pain by dwelling on intricate plots about all the hypothetical scenarios that will now never unfold. When baffling people or health, adding anticipatory fear about permanent invalidity often overstates what doctors confirm as manageable challenges, while feeling the acute emotions of immediate hardship is unavoidable. Layering on abstract future worries rarely improves the situation. At best, it distracts us from being fully present and dealing with reality before us. At worst, it generates bonus suffering atop an already full plate. This mental tendency toward imaginary pains becomes even more wasteful in less significant circumstances. How much vital energy do we needlessly drain daily by overthinking, overanalyzing, and in the worst case scenario building? We lament conversations that never happened, concoct fictional confrontations, and chastise ourselves for missteps that exist only in our minds. If we awaken to this habit, we open new wellsprings of inner peace. We realize our minds are experts in manifesting imaginary pains to disturb us far more frequently than reality itself requires. We become conscious of the space between what is actual and the horror movies our brains compulsively generate to torment ourselves. With this awareness, we can intercept cyclismic thinking patterns before entirely playing out. We can pause and root ourselves back in the present facts, what has genuinely occurred right now. Versus the terrors we are inventing, usually the reality is milder and more manageable than the absurd plots we allow to colonize our minds. We need not make everything so dramatic. Much of life is neutral, neither exceptionally positive nor negative, but ordinary and mundane. Our minds ascribe exaggerated meaning to the most unremarkable events, turning them into looming symbolic threats to validate our restless inner worlds. When we disidentify from these self-created plot lines, the ordinary moments can be ordinary. We conserve our energy and attention for authentically challenging circumstances as they arrive, rather than spending them on imagined pains of our confection. Our inner reservoirs of calm stability are far more profound than our catastrophic thinking led us to believe. Indeed, reasonable consideration of potential risks and preparation remains wise, but constantly trafficking in worst-case scenario fantasies amounts to self-inflicted psychological torture, not prudent thought. We must discern the difference between rationally contemplating contingencies versus becoming lost in emotional fugues about imagined futures. Let's earnestly examine where most of our daily angst indeed originates. It stems more often from the stories spinning in our minds than exterior circumstances. We are the ones inflicting our mental anguish. The world itself remains neutral mainly until we overlay our fearful narratives upon it. So, pause that reflects toward imaginary pains. Anchor yourself in the truth of this moment over the hypotheticals. Your mind frantically spins when you find your thoughts drifting into catastrophic future casting. Remember, you are more often frightened than genuinely hurt. Do not suffer needlessly from pains existing merely in imagination. Reality itself provides enough to navigate without tormenting yourself further. Be vigilant of this tendency and meet each moment as it arrives rather than the disastrous forms you've conjured in your mind's theater. Don't create your own. Chapter 5. Don't create your upsets. Upset you. Don't have to turn this into something it doesn't have to upset you. Marcus Aurelius. So often we are the ones who take a neutral situation and turn it into a source of distress and anguish. A slight mishap or inconvenience should only be blown out of proportion into a crisis if we choose to make it so. The root of many upsets lies not in the event itself, but in the stories and narratives we construct around them. In our minds we take minor setbacks as injustices, fires that must be fought. We turn obstacles into blazing emergencies that send us scrambling in frantic response. But what if we simply didn't? What if we had the mind to pause before spinning ourselves into upset, to calmly look at the circumstance with equanimity before making something out of it? The flat tire, the rude comment, the delayed flight, none of these has to be turned into bigger upsets than they inherently are when we don't resist what happened and avoid exaggerating it in our inner narratives. The situation is simply as it is, nothing more. You will always have a choice in how disturbed you will allow yourself to become. You can let go of the habit of turning minor issues into major crises. Meet each event with a spirit of acceptance first, not emotionally fueled overreactions. Ask yourself if you need to turn this into something bigger. The power to upset yourself needlessly is one you can divest yourself of with. Practice catching yourself before fueling dramas in your mind. You become non-reactive, undisturbed by life's inevitabilities. A missed train or spilt coffee need not rattle you. Nothing has to upset you unless you choose to make it so. Consider a typical scenario: being cut off in traffic by another driver. For many of us, this situation is enough to send us into a tailspin. We immediately turn it into a personal affront, an unforgivable insult. We make up elaborate stories about the other driver's intentions and weave narratives justifying our outrage. Before we know it, we've transformed a simple occurrence into a catastrophe demanding our anger. But was any of that inner turmoil necessary? What if, instead of making it into something bigger than it was, we acknowledged it as a thoughtless driving mistake and moved on, rather than generating resentment and self-created emotional dramas? we could let the neutral event remain neutral. This ability to avoid turning situations into crises applies to everything from minor daily irritations to larger life challenges. A romantic rejection need not be converted into a scathing self-judgment about one's worthiness if we don't make it so. Losing a job need not become an existent potential catastrophe defining our whole identity. Even significant illnesses or accidents need not be made worse by layering negative narratives atop the already difficult circumstances. So often the roots of compounded suffering stem from the meaning we insist on forcibly grafting onto neutral events until we immediately make stories that upset us about how we were wrong, how it's unfair, how it ruins everything, until we made it something more significant than it needed to be. It was just a normal part of the ebb and flow of life. The upsets do not arise from the circumstances themselves, they emerge from our thought patterns and internal commentary. Constantly narrates our experiences through emotional dramas that perturb us. Yet none of that self-induced suffering was inherently required. We always have the option to be with situations as they are without inflating them into bigger deals than they need to be. Yes, frustrations, disappointments, and difficulties are inevitable parts of life, but the amount of inner turmoil and anguish we create atop them is entirely a choice many of us make so instinctively that we don't realize we're doing it. The more conscious you become of this tendency to amplify situations into self-created disturbances, the more power you reclaim over your state of mind. With self-awareness, you catch the self-narration beginning to exaggerate events with an emotional spin. You realize you are turning this into an upset, not the circumstance itself, and in seeing that you suddenly have a choice. Do you proceed with making more out of this than needed, or do you stop the train of anxious storytelling and witness the situation with calm acceptance? Cultivating this ability takes practice. Our conditioning runs deep toward turning each experience into a dramatic story which we become engrossed in and emotionally invested in. Arguing with, like any habit, it takes commitment to change the automatic pattern. But as you hone this skill of non-reactivity, you feel more significant levels of serenity take root. You realize how much of your former anguish was never inherent to events themselves. You were the one authoring it through compulsive narrative building. As you consciously choose to let situations be what they are, they become far less laden with charged significance. You reserve your energies for responding wisely and thoughtfully, rather than expending them on invented upset sets. From this spacious mental place of accepting what is, you gain valuable clarity over where your efforts are most needed. Having not drained yourself by melodramatic reactivity, your reservoirs remain filled to address true priorities with steady care. You need not be rattled, for nothing has to upset you that you don't make into something bigger. In your mind, you rediscover the lighter side of life through this stance. The flat tire that might have once sent you reeling now feels more akin to a mere nuisance as you address it without making a federal case of the matter. The rude store clerk you choose not to turn into a personal insult becomes a momentary blip unworthy of derailing your good mood. You handle inevitable inconveniences with pluck and poise instead of dramatic hysterics. This is not to say become a robot. The big moments will still move you as any human would expect, but even then you gain mastery over your responses instead of compounding anguish through needless escalation via alarming stories that only you created. You maintain sovereignty over whether difficulties upset you more than they need to make it a practice to pause before narrating events into self-created upsets. Notice the energy drain you have habitually indulged by turning small things into big dramas rooted in your invented scripts. Notice the inner stillness that settles when you allow circumstances to be as they are. Instead, the more you embody this mindful detachment, the more you wonder why you ever turn so much into something more significant to upset yourself over. Nothing has to unsettle you, so you don't needlessly escalate into a provocative narrative. Don't create crises from life's inevitabilities, let them pass in Grace challenges will always come up. That's just part of being human, but it's conclusion. Up to us whether we turn them into major problems or just temporary obstacles to overcome. Do we have the ability to deal with every situation calmly and clearly? Or will we keep reacting strongly to every little thing? It's our choice every moment. Choosing to stay calm and clear-headed allows us to reach our full potential as conscious beings. We won't be bothered by anything unless we let ourselves be. With practice, our strong reactions will fade away, leaving us with a peaceful state of mind, free from the negative stories we used to tell ourselves. Life goes on, and we can move forward without being disturbed.